Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I am back with another part of the Digging Through Discographies with Stone Temple Pilots. Now, tonight this is going to be a bite-sized video because I'm going to be talking about an EP instead of a full-length album. The reason for that, though, is because I think this is pretty vital to the storyline of Stone Temple Pilots as a band. And it also is a nice bridge between the previous album and the album that I'll be talking about next week. So sit back as I talk about High Rise. So a little bit of context before we get into the actual album. As I said last week, on February 27th, 2013, Stone Temple Pilots fired lead vocalist Scott Weiland, but he wasn't going to be taking that sitting down. Weiland responded to the firing with his own statement, quote, "I learned of my supposed termination from Stone Temple Pilots this morning by reading about it in the press. Not sure how I can be terminated from a band that I founded, fronted, and co-wrote many of its biggest hits, but that's something for the lawyers to figure out." He also claimed that the band had no right to perform under the Stone Temple Pilots moniker with another singer. Who's the other singer, you ask? Why, it's none other than Linkin Park frontman Chester Bennington, who started working with the band around this time. So, the firing resulted in legal action, the three remaining members suing Weiland to prevent him from calling himself a former member of STP, while Weiland countersuing the other members for wrongfully attempting to fire him for misleading the public by referring to their performances with Bennington as STP, and to dissolve the band STP. Both lawsuits were later settled out of court, allowing the Bennington-fronted band to continue using the STP name. I find that really interesting because Weiland was one of the founding members, as you know, we've talked about in the first episode of this Digging Through Discography. So I wonder what the settlement was for him to be able to push off and be like, yeah, I'm no longer a former member of STP. You guys can keep the name. It's interesting. Maybe I'll be able to look into that someday and tell you guys about it. On May 18, 2013, the three remaining members of Stone Temple Pilots performed with Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, appearing as special guests at the 21st annual KROQ Weenie Roast and the May 19, 2013 live 105 BFD Festival near San Francisco, where they performed a new song, Out of Time, the first single from this particular EP. On May 19, 2013, STP released a free download of their new single, Out of Time, with Bennington, now an official member of the band. He exclaimed that years before in interviews that being in Stone Temple Pilots was his lifelong dream, so it's really cool that he got to live out a dream of his. They did a little bit of touring to get this EP a little bit of publicity, though they weren't ever necessarily looking to do a full-length LP, only because, one, they didn't have their own recording label to put it under, and Bennington was also pretty busy with Linkin Park as well. However, on October 8th, 2013, Stone Temple Pilots released a 5-track EP entitled High Rise through Playpen LLC, credited as Stone Temple Pilots with Chester Bennington. This particular EP did have two singles, Out of Time on May 19, 2013, and Black Heart on September 18, 2013. Now, a little bit of a side note before I go into the actual music. I never listened to this album until literally last week. And the reason for that is because at the time, as a Stone Temple Pilots fan, I was really, really saddened and kind of angry at the fact that Stone Temple Pilots had got rid of Weiland. He is one of my favorite vocalists, and for them to basically break up the band as it is, it kind of sucked to me. And then, on top of that, as we've talked about in Linkin Park, Digging Through Discography, I wasn't hugely into the newer sound of Linkin Park, and this was around the time of after Living Things was dropped, where at the time I didn't really like that album. Now I do. I think it was a combination of that, and then also Chester Bennington now being part of the band, and I was honestly, my first reaction was, he doesn't fit. His voice does not fit the band. That was my first thought, because I was thinking back to Core and I was thinking back to Purple, and I didn't think he had the lower range in his voice to be able to pull off that. I don't think he had the gruff. He has a great high end, and his screaming's great, but his voice is pretty thin when it comes to a rock singer. So I didn't think he would fit. And for those reasons alone, I just never took a listen to it. But honestly, this is why I do these Digging Through Discographies, not just to give you guys information on albums that you may have never listened to or give you the context of everything, but it also gives me a chance to go back and listen to things that I haven't listened to. And I'm happy that I did. Don't get me wrong, this isn't the most amazing CD ever. This isn't going to be a staple of rock listeners forever. It honestly is pretty solid without being amazing or being horrible. It's basically in the middle. I'm not saying it's necessarily mediocre, it just doesn't really stand out in the scene that was around that time. It has touches of Slash, it has touches of Velvet Revolver. It still has a lot of their psychedelic rock kind of ideas and more 60s and 70s at times. But I will say that if you take the time to listen to these 5 tracks, it is pretty solid. I was definitely wrong when I said Chester Bennington does not fit Stone Temple Pilots. He definitely wouldn't fit Purple and Core era Stone Temple Pilots. But one thing that, I didn't think about until now is that with the thinning of Whelan's voice, it does fit perfectly with a person like Chester Bennington, where at that point in time, Whelan wouldn't even have been able to sing the parts of Core and Purple. So why do I give Bennington a hard break? If anything, he sounds better than what Whelan was sounding at the time. He has more power in his voice, and I honestly think that his harmonies are much better on this album than Whelan's were on the previous couple of albums. And his voice gives a lot of power and gives a little bit more leeway for the rest of the band to play a little bit harder, even if they are sounding a little bit kind of similar to what Stone Temple Pilots, the previous album, was. Songs like Black Heart, songs like Cry Cry still harken back to a little bit of that psychedelic rock, the more 70s-esque type of rock. But honestly, Out of Time is a little bit more hard rock than it is the psychedelic rock, though it does still have a little bit of those tinges. Same on the Inside, honestly sounds like something more of Dead by Sunrise. It definitely could have fit that vibe of Chester Bennington's rock band that I talked about before. And Tomorrow actually is the first time in a while where I could say I can hear tinges of Purple and Tiny Music from this band. And it also kind of foreshadows a song on the next album that I'll be talking about, Reds and Blues. I think everything is solid. I think this is the first time in a while where I'm really, really impressed with Robert DeLeo's bass parts, especially on Same on the Inside. The finger picking on there and just the fast-paced bass work is fantastic. And honestly, every single song has some interesting bass lines. It also gives room for Dean DeLeo to improvise much more than he usually does. He still does a lot of good guitar solos like he did on the previous album, though the rest aren't as interesting as other ones that you've heard over time, and honestly, the ones from the previous album are a little bit more interesting than this particular one. But all in all, a pretty fun album. The lyrics, nothing special. It's kind of similar to what Chester Bennington had been putting out at the time. There are a couple of songs about depression in Same on the Inside and Cry Cry. Tomorrow is about missing a loved one while being on the road. Black Heart is about a sinister person looking to manipulate a naive person. And then Out of Time is talking about mortality and finding peace and love in the idea that we can't all be here forever. Honestly, a mixed bag. And Bennington does have some decent lyrics. I don't think these are definitely it, and honestly they're a little bit more plain than what Whelan had done in the past. But again, all in all, I think it's just a fun album. If you never checked out this particular album because you are an STP fan and you could never see Bennington being a part of this band, or if it just slipped away, it doesn't really push the STP name in any particular way, but it's them having fun. And I'm just sad that I never checked this out sooner. High Rise debuted at number 21 on the Billboard 200, selling 13,520 copies in its first week. Out of Time peaked at number 1 on the mainstream rock and number 22 on the alternative songs Billboard charts. And Blackheart peaked at number 15 on the mainstream rock charts. After that, though, in March 2015, the band officially dropped the With Chester Bennington part from the band name. On November 9, 2015, Bennington announced he was amicably leaving Stone Temple Pilots to focus more on Linkin Park. And this is where we leave the band for a little bit without a singer, because If you are a fan of SCP or, rock in general, you probably know that on December 3rd, 2015, Scott Weiland was found dead of an accidental overdose of alcohol, pills, and cocaine on his tour bus in Minnesota. I honestly remember exactly where I was when I heard that news. I was on my way to work in Northampton, and I remember pulling over on the side of the road and being like, wow, that's insane. One of my favorite singers of all time passed away. And like a lot of the lead singers of this particular grunge era, it was suicide or overdose, if you will. Still to this day, it's crazy to think that he is gone, because he was an incredible singer and incredible songwriter who dealt with a lot of huge issues, mostly caused by himself. But, it was weird because he was also aware of these issues, but again, with addiction, it pulls you back in, when you don't want to be there. It's sad that we never got to see more Stone Temple Pilots where Scott Weiland was sober. The previous album was only the third one where he was sober during the SCP term. Core was the other one, and Libertard for Velvet Revolver was the third. So it makes you think, like, yeah, some incredible albums like Purple and Tiny Music, but at what cost? Stone Temple Pilots released a statement noting his passing, in which they thanked him for his time with them and said he was gifted beyond words, and he was. And then 2 years later, the other lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots, Chester Bennington, was found dead at his home. His death was ruled as suicide by hanging. It was a shocker of a loss for a lot of people, and me included. I've talked about it plenty of times on my channel, but it's just crazy to think that both lead singers of Stone Temple Pilots, both gone now at young ages, 2 years apart, because of depression, because of anxiety, because of addiction. It just goes to show that even if it looks like someone's on top of the world and has done an incredible amount of work in their field, that doesn't mean that they are invulnerable to doubt, to feeling worthless, to feeling depressed, feeling anxious, to addiction. It happens to everyone out there. Fortunately, I gotta leave this on kind of a sad note tonight, but it will get better in the next video. But in order for you to see that, you gotta do a couple of things. If you have listened to this, let me know what you think about this EP, what you love or hate about it. Share this with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel so that way you can see the videos that I'm working on. Thank you so much. I will see you on Wednesday for the next 5-minute theory. This is the Music Fan signing out.